Hello and welcome to the National Debate. I'm Madhadas Gopalakrishnan. Viewers, in his first address to the U.S. Congress since taking office, the U.S. President Trump didn't hold back, laying out a bold vision for his country and taking direct aim at key issues on the global stage. Amongst the highlights of his speech, Trump turned the spotlight on a growing tariff war, notably mentioning India as he accused the country of charging the U.S. unfairly. Now, President Trump has announced plans to impose reciprocal tariffs on most of America's trading partners, including India, China, Canada, and Mexico, starting the 2nd of April. Trump's made it quite clear that the current trade system is unfair to the U.S. and has always been. Donald Trump's presidency has also seen multiple flip-flops in the past. After warning of tariffs with Canada and Mexico, now Donald Trump has announced a pause on those tariffs as well, at least until the 2nd of April. On this edition of the National Debate, we'll discuss how Donald Trump is redefining the world order and whether India and the world are prepared for the new America that we're talking about. Now, the April 2 deadline has been set by Trump. He said that India is charging us unfair tariffs. He's also, of course, gone on to say that reciprocal taxes will be implemented by the 2nd of April. He's also said that it's a bid to keep us out of their markets. He's further gone on to say that India charges 100% on automobiles. Now, all of this happening at a time when India is there, the Indian Commerce Minister pretty much in Washington, D.C., and India's response has been this. S. Jaishankar said that we had an open conversation on tariffs. He's also, of course, gone on to describe that we had agreed on the need for a trade agreement, and that's expected to happen by fall of this year. Trade Minister in the U.S. for India-U.S. trade pact is what he has stated, and Trump has kept energy prices reasonable is also the statement that has been made by India thus far. But what really are, in fact, the implications of all of this? Let's take a quick look at some of the other aspects of the entire trade war. Now, this is, of course, the kind of trade imbalance that U.S. is talking about. They say that the tariff from U.S. on India in 2018, the average of it at least, was 2.72%. India's average tariffs were 11.59%. And that's pretty much been the ballpark. And in fact, while the U.S. tariffs have also risen, they've gone up to 3.83 in 2022. It's 15.3 as far as India's tariffs on US is concerned. And this is what really Trump is talking about changing as far as India and the United States are concerned. Let's quickly now take this across to our guests. Let me introduce our panel of experts who are joining us, not just from here in our studio, but from across the world, as it were. With us is Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Senior Fellow of the IPCS. Major General Dhruv Katoch is also with us. He's the Director of India Foundation. We have also joining us David Sofair, Republican strategist. Vibhuti Jha is an ex-Republican candidate for the New York Assembly. Dean Baxendale is an international publisher and columnist at the Sunday Guardian. Joining us also is Dr. Sergei Markov, former advisor to President Putin. Joining us also is Alexander Beletsky, who's an international relations and military expert. Philip Moreau Chevrolet is also joining us, as is Andrew K.P. Leung, independent China strategist. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And let me begin first and foremost with Vibhuti Jha. Vibhuti Jha, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of concerns. The biggest question that has puzzled many is that when you have a bilateral meeting and you announce a roadmap for a free trade agreement, what's the hurry, what's the urgency of announcing these tariffs from the 2nd of April, particularly when India has accepted some of these demands and our Commerce Minister is actually there in Washington, D.C. to negotiate this trade agreement?
Thank you very much for having me today. And, as a student of international economics and banking, what I have always known for a fact, that tariff has always been an instrument of negotiation. It's always has been an instrument of negotiation. And what Mr. Trump is doing is actually addressing the financial obesity of America. Because at $36 trillion debt and $1 trillion debt saving, he has to actually manage the money. And that's a critical element here. So tariff is a tool that he has been talking about that the market has been used forever and to the disadvantage of America. Even if you remember in 2016, when he became the president for the first time, he did pay compliments to China and everybody else, saying that those people were smart in negotiating a deal with America because we were negotiating badly. This man is a successful businessman. He understands the nature of money. He totally understands that today's obesity and our ability, American ability, and I say myself, our ability to print notes and address our expenses is not going to work. And that's the reason why you see he's trying to cut down on expenses throughout. Now, insofar as tariff is concerned, you have seen he's not a flip-flop. Actually, this is exactly what tariff does. You make an announcement and you go for a negotiation, and that's what is happening between Canada and Mexico. Another vital part here, insofar as India is concerned,
Yeah.
let's remember one particular truth. We are number 10 when it comes to the trading volume with America at $86 billion or so. Mexico is to $440 billion. China is $404 billion. And Canada is $390 billion. So India has a lot to gain by expanding the trading relationship with America. Therefore, I feel that India's effort to boost up its own trading platform merges and manages world with the American interest.
Vibhuti, stay with us. I want to bring in a couple of points of view as well from across the world, in fact, which are, I mean, several experts from different parts of different countries are here. But let me begin by Abhijit. Abhijit, India in its budget announced some kind of swaps as far as, bourbon whiskey and high-end motorcycles, etc. We thought that perhaps would be enough ahead of the bilateral meeting. The bilateral meeting happens, we hear talk of an FTA by fall of this year. The Indian minister goes there, and right in the middle of that visit, we hear this announcement happening, inside from the Capitol building. The big question is this, that what does this really mean? If this is a bargaining chip, fine. But then, it appears to be a complete mind game. And at this point of time, with Trump flip-flopping the way he is with Canada and Mexico, what exactly should India expect?
So, Madhav, the important thing to notice is, we haven't panicked the way the Canadians and Mexicans have. If you remember yesterday, Trudeau was literally crying on TV. Why do you think that's not happening here? Because we're also very good at playing these transactional games. During Trump 1, for example, if you remember, he had raised this issue of Harley-Davidson 150% tariff on it. We went on talking for 3.5 years, and by the end of 3.5 years, it was election season and he couldn't impose tariffs on us. So we've also played this game with the Americans. This is, it's a very carefully calibrated ballet. It's for some kind of concession somewhere. Those will be given. But, at a much larger level, he has to show that, all these GATT and WTO international setup of tariffs and things, these were negotiated by American bureaucrats. His big fight right now is with the American bureaucracy because he believes it's politicians who should be taking decisions. And it is the bureaucracy's job to execute those decisions, not take those decisions and foist it down the throats of politicians. So it ticks a sort of political agenda of his back home. But for India, we don't really need to worry about these things. Are we going to have some punitive tariffs here and there? Absolutely. But let me ask you this. Ford was a very big player in India. Till about 7 years back, the Ford EcoSport was the biggest selling SUV in India, mini SUV.
True.
And then Ford just collapsed because it couldn't adjust to the Indian market, right? Today, the Japanese completely control the market and the Taiwanese...
Because it's not just about
Koreans.
tariffs, it's also about competition in India, which can be pretty intense, it's cost sensitive. There's all sorts of factors at play here.
So you're more than welcome to come in. Another thing is about chicken and potatoes. They want American potatoes and chicken meat to come in. Now, I bet you, have you seen chickens at an American market? One leg, a Maryland, it's called, the thigh and the leg, is the size of an entire Indian chicken sold at the market. In India, we want small chickens. Americans don't get that. For them, everything's, we want it big. We want it bigger and even bigger and the biggest and, whatever.
So what's suitable is the question.
So exactly. So there is a market mismatch. Even if we remove the tariffs, the market penetration is going to be very, very tough.
Right. Let me bring in fact, David Sofair on that. David Sofair, it's not just about tariffs. The big question is this, that you have countries, which have, for instance, in the automobile sector, success stories of Japanese, of Korean, of European countries as well. The question that many are asking is that, if you have a Ford and Harley-Davidson pulling out, there are other factors also which forces them to pull out. There's also the suitability. There's extreme competition happening here. There's a lot of pressure on prices because the Indian consumers are price sensitive. Perhaps American companies also need to address all of that rather than just pushing for these trade barriers. Of course, the lesson for India also is this, that perhaps India should not just depend on the US alone as a market and perhaps should be diversifying to Europe and other parts of the world as well. But your response to this, David Sofair?
Well, as you see in America, debt to GDP is starting to shrink now. So we have that. As far as trade goes with India, we are, we're re-examining it closely. And like you said, yes, trends of auto manufacturers do change. So whilst Ford was a hot seller a few years ago, that's no longer the case. If you look at Harley-Davidson, another great example, globally it sort of fell out of favor. The bikes are way down. So it's a mixed bag, and it's definitely a cyclical thing. It's a cyclical when it comes to manufacturing, trade, and American imports into India. As far as export goes, there's very slow growth in Europe at the moment and China. So those are two huge historic trading partners for India as well. So it is a real mixed bag. And in the States, you see the jobs have come way down, in the short term. A lot of it to do with not just the federal cuts, but also the big tech cuts as well. So there is definitely a readjustment happening here. It's definitely the quality of credit around the world is good, strong. There's definitely not recessionary fears. And we are renegotiating and readjusting the tariffs in respect to domestic and foreign trade. So I think once there's
right, I think we lost that connection there with David.
That would be a good thing. This is.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now. Go ahead.
And as far as Canada goes, there's a lot of noise in Canada about tariffs. But let me assure your viewers, this is temporary. Once Trudeau goes and all that, they're going to install a proper government there who will be ready to trade with America, India, and the rest of the world.
All right.
We look forward to getting. Look forward to
getting... Let me bring in Major General Dhruv Katoch on this. Major General Dhruv Katoch, the point is this. There's a lot of uncertainty, no doubt about it. You have reactions coming in from China, from Mexico, from Canada as well, who've been the most affected by it. Perhaps 2nd of April, we'll also be affected by it. But what's the big lesson for us? Shouldn't we also ensure that our manufacturing, which perhaps, some schemes such as Make in India, etc., they've been hyped and a lot has been spoken about, but perhaps in terms of its success, not as much as we would have liked. And also in terms of looking at other markets, why export only to the United States? Perhaps look at other parts of the world as well. Lot for India as well to learn in terms of resilience and being able to, overcome such storms in the future.
Thank you, Madhav. Yes. But you see, ultimately, what comes out very clearly is India, in my view, has been prepared. It may be making a lot of difference to Canada, possibly to Mexico, but to India, I don't think the impact is going to be very great. So whatever comes, I think we are in a position to handle it. When we are looking at electronic goods or manufacturing like the vehicles, there will be much more competition as far as the Indian market is concerned. But there are certain things which India is not going to accept, regardless of which way the tariff goes. And one of these is going to be the agricultural products. Because in America, agriculture is a very large-scale enterprise. They've got huge farms. In India, the farmer is very small. So their interests will be protected. But besides that, I think India is quite open to competition. I really don't see much of a problem as far as tariffs are concerned. We will handle it. How the rest of the world handle it depends on them. But for India, I don't think there are too many concerns on the tariff front.
All right. Let me bring in fact, our guest from China is also with us. Andrew K.P. Leong, we've seen the response coming in from the Foreign Ministry of China, where they said that if it is a war that U.S. wants, whether trade or otherwise, we are prepared for it. What are we looking at in terms of China's response in coming days, Andrew K.P. Leong?
Well, China is much better prepared this time for Trump 2.0, having gone through the first term with a lot of tariffs happening at that time. So China has been, in the interim, has been shifting its economy towards more trade with the global south and also technological self-reliance. and also relying on its internal economy. I think with China you can see that China is pretty unruffled. But on the other hand, what China's seeing is more than trade. It's a total upending of the world order, as America seems to be concentrating on the Western Hemisphere. You look at what he wanted during his first days in the White House. He wanted Greenland, he wanted Canada, he wanted Panama Canal, he wanted Mexico, and also influencing the whole of South America. They're all in the Western Hemisphere. And then even in recent years, America is moving its military assets away from the first island chain, centered in Okinawa, to more the assets to the second island chain. So he's shifting his emphasis away from the rest of the world, including Europe. That's why he's now trying to wind down Ukraine to concentrate on Western Hemisphere and the Asia Pacific. He doesn't want a war. I mean, he's likely to be a president for peace, but he wants America to win. He doesn't want America to be what he sees as being cheated over trade, and hence all his tariffs.
Vibhuti, do you see that as necessarily being true, that here's a president who doesn't want war? And we all know about the entire theory of spheres of influence as far as President Trump is concerned. Do you think that it's more of a consolidation towards the Americas that President Trump is looking at? And, you know, in that sense, as Mr. Andrew K.P. Leong seems to be suggesting, moving out of Europe, moving out of Asia Pacific, is that actually true or necessarily true?
I would tend to agree partly. And what the more important part here is that Trump, I have always said this, he's not a man who wants war anywhere. If you do a little bit of a background analysis of Mr. Trump as a persona, think about it. He's a builder developer. What is he famous for? His famous brand, Trump Towers, Trump malls, Trump, golf courses, and he hates war. And that's the reason why he's trying to cut down on the wars and American involvement in wars all over the world, because he knows his properties can be destroyed by a dynamite, any war that can happen. So he has an essential persona. He's a builder developer. That's why he looks at Gaza as a Rivera. Think about it from that perspective. So he wants to end wars. True. He's not interested in wars at all. So I agree with Andrew that here is going to be, this man has brought in my opinion, he's abandoning common nonsense and he's embracing uncommon sense. And that's the rest of the world is unprepared for as of now.
That's an interesting way of putting it there, Vibhuti Jha. But the biggest and the most interesting spectacle out of all this, there's India, there's China, there's Mexico, but it's the US-Canada spat that has got everyone's attention. Why are we saying this? Let's take a quick look at the kind of statements that have been coming in from President Trump as well as from Prime Minister Trudeau. This is what Trump said after speaking to Trudeau. Trudeau called me to ask about tariffs. And then he goes on to add as far as what he spoke to Trudeau about. If you can quickly get that graphic up on screen, if I can ask my production team to get that up there. Reminded him of deaths due to fentanyl. It's drugs that's being spoken about. Fentanyl that came from Canada and Mexico that has actually impacted. Trudeau's response wasn't good enough, says Trump. Call ended in a somewhat friendly manner is what Trump has added. He had no answers on Canadian elections is another point being made. And Trudeau's using the tariff issue to stay in power is what Donald Trump says. Let me take this across to Dean Baxendale, who's joining us. Dean, any of this, this entire issue, of course, is something that has, raised a lot of hackles there in Canada. A lot of statements coming in, threats to cut off power and electricity to several states, the United States also coming in. But many at this point of time questioning as to what really has happened and what really will happen between Canada and the United States, because this also threatens to impact Canada very badly when we talk about the economics of it.
Sure. Well, it also threatens to negatively impact the U.S. economy quite dramatically. We had a free trade deal, which Donald Trump, by the way, extolled the virtues of his USMCA, CUSMA deal, which ultimately was, as far as he was concerned, a critical linchpin in the success of his administration, along with tax cuts. But here we find ourselves in the middle of a trade war, a hybrid war that's being negotiated, quite frankly, in the public sphere, where Donald Trump is the chief disruptor. He worked on the art of the deal. It should be called the art of chaos. And the world is not prepared for the dismantling of the world order as it existed before. And what Donald Trump is doing is regionalizing these wars. But ultimately, this is about power. This is about effective control of resources. Canada it is set to be the world's #1 supplier of uranium, and the U.S. Policy on uranium and nuclear power to power the next generation is rather a linchpin in the future of economic prosperity. We also have oil and gas, but the fact that Doug Ford, our premier, has threatened as of Monday to put on a 25% tariff on electricity speaks to how deep this war goes, and Canadians are unified on this. There's many things that I agree with the president that we need to deal with, and the fentanyl specifically, because we published Willful Blindness, and we know exactly how deep the fentanyl trade and its ecosystem, the financial aspect of this, which is funding terrorism, including Khalistani terrorism back in India. These are serious issues that we've not dealt with as a country. Donald Trump is putting us on notice.
Okay, very interesting analysis there, David Sofair, but would you like to respond to that? Because there are many who are questioning what exactly is happening between US and Canada. You have Warren Buffett saying that, at the end of the day, he's raised concerns about the tax, saying that this is a tariff, it's an act of war, is what Warren Buffett says. There are also those who question that when US and Canada had a free trade agreement in '88, there were concerns within Canada about how it could come back to bite them. Are those fears real at this point of time? Is a concern that's being expressed from Canada's side as well? David.
Sure. Well, I think that Canada is in a lot of trouble with our tariffs, and they don't want to negotiate, and they have been the beneficiaries of one-sided trade with the United States for a long time. So I don't see Trudeau being in there for much longer. He is probably arguably Canada's most unpopular and ineffective prime minister. So it'll be interesting to see who we will work with in the new administration and really come to a strengthening between the two countries. So we look forward to that. In the meantime, the fentanyl problem on the southern border and northern continues. It is not only funding terror, but it's also destroying the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans, which the previous administration did not correctly address through open border and free trade with Canada policies.
But, Abhijit, let me bring you in on one question that many are asking at this point of time. If there's so many flip-flops happening, India, of course, and US, the ties, of course, appear to be pretty steady at this point of time. But Canada is not just, the northern neighbor of US with which it shares a significant border. There's so many cultural similarities, economic ties, etc. There are those who are questioning that if this can happen between US and Canada, does this raise questions about how reliable the US is as an ally, as a strategic partner?
Look, the US is going to be a very reliable ally if you pull your weight and aren't looking for free lunches. I think Trump's thing is very clear. Like, he insists people come to him in suits or formal dress. He doesn't appreciate Zelensky rocking in a sweatshirt. He's very much like that with trade relations. He doesn't like freeloaders, and he doesn't like people who run inefficiencies. Now, take Canada, for example. One of the big sectors going to get hit is the dairy sector. Now, guess who runs the dairy sector out there? A significant part of it is Khalistani linked. It is such an inefficient sector. It is artificially controlled. There are limits on the number of farms. Excess milk is thrown out to keep prices artificially controlled and things like that. Canada has nobody but itself to blame for the sectoral problems that its own economy faces. The second problem with Canada is the center itself is so far to the left. Pierre Poilievre in America would be the left fringe of the Democratic Party, almost. He's against this latest gender madness wokeism, but that's about it. Economically, he's nowhere near a Ronald Reagan or something like that. He's nowhere near a Stephen Harper even. Stephen Harper was more to the right than Pierre Poilievre is. So, this is something that Canada has to sit down very calmly and deal with. These kind of pointless posturing positions aren't going to get you anywhere with Trump. He does not respect weakness.
Right. Let me take this quick response from Dean Baxendale. Dean Baxendale, would you like to respond to that? Because, many of these problems are Canada's own making, number one. And number two, Trump is talking about the lack of response from Canada on a very big issue of fentanyl and drug abuse, which they say Canada has just not done enough to control. And that's pretty much the same they've said about China as well. How do you respond to that, Dean?
I couldn't agree more with respect to the fentanyl crisis that is gripping the world, quite frankly. Canada is a transnational shipment and manufacturing point, most of it coming out of Vancouver through ports that are actually controlled by the Chinese, Li Ka-shing, billionaire, philanthropist, but also known as a known triad boss. So that is in documents in the U.S. intelligence community as well as the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. So we have a major problem with respect to fentanyl, its ecosystem in Canada, and ultimately our laws, which ultimately we had one of the biggest busts ever in the e-pirate scandal that involved money laundering, fentanyl in the West Coast casinos. And it was killed because somebody left an informant's name in there. So the whole thing dies. The Americans want certain Canadians who they have on the extradition list, who are criminals that are tied into this network, just like they asked Mexico to give them 21 known criminals to face charges in the United States. They are also looking for that in Canada. So yes, it's a major problem. And it goes much deeper inside Canada.
So, Andrew K.P. Leung, you not just have the United States, but you have a Canadian expert as well talking about the role of China in spreading and sending fentanyl to the U.S. Your response to that?
Well, I think China has issued a white paper and government a statement, very firm statement on the work that the Chinese government has done in controlling fentanyl. But I think behind it all, in spite of the deficiencies or inefficiencies of all implied by all these tariffs, I think what you're seeing is the Americans seem to be retreating from the world order it itself created. For example, the threat is already drawn from the WHO. It's threatening, is almost coupled at the WTO, and there is even talk of withdrawing from NATO and even from the United Nations.
Right.
So I think that we're seeing a sea change, not just trade and not just efficiencies, not just other people's failings, but a total redirection. Right. American policy, Americans' trajectory towards a more self-centered, built on Americans' might, making America great again, if necessary, at the expense of even its allies, and then trampling upon the international rules it has created. So I think that we're seeing a much more serious challenge of all other nations facing than just tariffs.
Let's quickly now get on to the next debating point that we have, and this is, of course, the big one. What's going to happen in Europe? What happens between Russia and Ukraine? It's a $1 million question, a $1 billion question, in fact, at this point of time. Let's quickly get that up on the screen. What really are we looking at in terms of the letter that was written by Zelensky to President Trump, and what did he have to say in terms of the implications of those particular letters written as well? Let's first take a quick look at that face-off that we saw inside the Oval Office last Friday.
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You
God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this.
I'm not
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. Yeah, you're playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
All right, from that spat to a letter written by President Zelensky to Trump, and what exactly did Trump have to say following that letter? He says he received a letter from Zelensky. He also goes on to talk about what he says in terms of Ukraine being ready for peace. There's also, of course, he's added that he spent millions of dollars on the conflict at this point of time. He further adds that there seems to be no end to this war. He has further added that it's time to stop this madness and killing that's taking place in Ukraine. So what are we looking at in terms of the implications? Are we looking at a Ukraine that is now perhaps more in sync following those meetings with the UK, with France as well? Let me take that question across to Dr. Sergey Markov as well as Alexander Beletsky. Coming across to Alexander Beletsky first. Alexander Beletsky, are we looking at a Ukraine that following the Oval Office meeting, something that is pretty much unheard of in diplomacy, now Ukraine coming full circle and being convinced that it needs to sign the mineral deal or whatever it needs to do to ensure that there is now a roadmap towards peace?
No, I think all the time spoke about economy, but we're speaking about the global security issue, which is, I think, more important even than economical issue. And we will see the total change of the global security issue on the world map, what we now see in Europe. Because we have, I'm speaking from Ukrainian perspective, being Ukrainian citizen and being Ukrainian military, as almost a lot of Ukrainians which are fighting against the ugly aggression in the 21st century by Russia. And so anyway, we're going to fight. So it's and I think that European values and Europeans are now starting to support Ukrainian, and we'll have some changes. So we will lose probably the American support, but we are going to fight. It will be the new consortium of European security issues.
No, but if you're so confident of the EU support, why would President Zelensky then write to President Trump talking about the mineral deal and the fact that you're now ready to accept that?
I don't know. You should ask President Zelensky. We are speaking also about Ukrainian society. And unfortunately, he didn't send a letter to President Trump. It was some post in some social media.
Okay.
Which was taken by President Trump. So we're not speaking about some specific letter.
No letter to President Trump. It's a post. Would you like to comment on that before I cross to Alexander? In fact, let me get an Alexander on that. Alexander Beletsky, in fact, Dr. Sergey Markov, would you like to respond to what Alexander has just said? That there was no letter, it was a post.
Of course, Mr. Zelensky, how to say him, wrong, because the point is that absolute majority of Ukrainians want peace. They want peace as soon as possible. And also, popularity of Zelensky is very small, exactly because he continues the war. Zelensky is some kind of maniac of the war, who won't continue this war because war allows him to keep power in situation when he is not popular. And if elections happen, he will lose the position of the president. And Americans ask him about corruption because Trump and his team believes that Zelensky team stolen billions of dollars from American military support during this war. You may know that the borders of Ukraine is closed. And every day, 200 of the main Ukrainians are arrested on the border by Ukrainian security because they want to legally leave country, because they don't want to fight. And we're glad that Donald Trump now decided to stop participation of America in this. Frankly speaking, I don't think that Donald Trump is a good friend of Russia. Donald Trump approach to the Ukrainian war is the approach of the New York developing businessman who understand that Ukrainian war have no profitable result because Ukrainian army has any chance to win this war. It's only endless and losing money. And America already.
Many points, yeah, many points you've covered there, Dr. Sergey, but let me quickly bring in a response from Alexander before I open this up for debate. Alexander, you want to respond to that? Zelensky is just sticking on to power, and that's an allegation that has been made that his power and the fact that he's president has been, something of an undemocratic nature, the way in which he has behaved. And we even saw President Trump actually call him a dictator before, stepping back on that comment. Your response to that, Alexander?
Yeah, I think you just heard a part of Russian propaganda issues, which is we heard. So that's not truth. So we'll finish with Russia, and Russia will be collapsed. You will see it very soon. Believe me, and we're working with it. And we have a lot of Ukrainian military issues. We use mostly now Ukrainian weapons to destroy. You can see it like every day. We destroy different infrastructure objects in Russia. We do it with Ukrainian weapons. Now, not American, not European. So we create a big military complex. We now are the biggest army in Europe, and together with other European countries, believe me, Mr. Marco, we will destroy you, and you will be killed also.
Okay, let's not get that drastic, please. Let's debate reasonably. But since you made that point, Dr. Sergey Markov, quick response from you before I take it across to other guests.
So you ask me?
Yes, because he says that, he believes that Russia will be destroyed in this war, not Ukraine. They've got the military backup. They've got EU backing them up, but they have a massive army. Your response to that very quickly, please, Dr. Markov.
Understand, I think our colleague exactly the same style of Vladimir Zelensky. After talk with Vladimir Zelensky, exactly such kind of speech, Donald Trump understands very clearly that Vladimir Putin and Sergei Markov are right, and Vladimir Zelensky is wrong and fully responsible for this war. That's why, to stop the war, Donald Trump has made pressure not on Vladimir Putin, but on Vladimir Zelensky.
Okay.
I think such discussion very well show who is aggressor.
Okay. Who's the aggressor? This is again a very big debating point we've seen for some years now. Major Dhruv Katoch, there are of course narratives on both sides, and that's understandable. It is a time of war. But what's the end game here? You have Trump, who of course, as we were discussing earlier, is a businessman. He's looking at peace. He's of course talked about the fact that there are millions of lives at stake and have been lost, and that shouldn't continue. But at the end of the day, with Zelensky also warming up to EU and the EU countries coming up, if you heard President Macron's speech, for instance, it almost, was like he was, urging his countrymen and Europe to, sort of come together and be prepared for a war against Russia. What are we looking at in that context? Are we looking at tempers cooling, or are we looking at them flaring up in Europe? Because if you heard the person from Ukraine, you heard Alexander Beletsky there, they're almost prepared and convinced that they are going to surge ahead and continue fighting this war. Major Katoch.
You see, Madhav, I think what Europe wants is for Ukraine to keep fighting to the last Ukrainian. But they are not going to get into the fight. They are not going to get involved. They may give a bit of money here and there. Even that is going to collapse. Without America's intelligence support, without America's financial backing, they can do nothing. Europe has lost the power to defend itself, leave alone defend Ukraine. So I think what you're going to see now is that this mindless war, in my view, you see Zelensky has been egged onto this war by the NATO powers. It was totally unnecessary. But now that you've got this war, 3 years have been fought, great losses have been made, there will be, in my view, a ceasefire which will come very shortly on as is where is basis. I'm afraid Ukraine is going to lose the Donbass. The Crimea was never theirs. So the land boundary which the Russians wanted from Russia through the Donbass onto Crimea, they will get. If they continue with this war, it is my belief that they will lose Odessa also. And once Ukraine loses Odessa, they lose control or they lose access to the Black Sea. That will make them a landlocked state. They still have an opportunity to salvage what they have. Take this peace deal. There's one point I wish to make. On this particular war, everybody keeps talking of it as a third world war may erupt and all that. Please get no wrong ideas. This is a local European war. It is a tribal war between two European countries. It has got nothing to do with the world. China is not involved, India is not involved, Americas are not involved, Africa is not involved. It's just one part of Europe, and that not even the whole of Europe, one part of Europe. I think wisdom dictates that Zelensky should come to a deal the best he can get.
Okay.
Otherwise, he's in trouble.
Let me get in Alexander on that. Alexander, there's a sense that perhaps, even the return of the land when about a month and a half into the fighting, if I remember correctly, in 2022, when that was offered to Ukraine, did not agree to that, and then it lost that deal, is what Russia says. Now, again, the kind of situation that we are looking at is that, make the best of what you have at this point of time, is the advice coming in from the Major General here in our studio. Do you think that that's a practical solution? Because, as time goes by, perhaps making a deal, getting the land returned to Ukraine, all of that is going to be very, very difficult. Alexander.
We just heard all this stuff from all these war criminals since the very beginning of invasion and the very beginning of the war. So that Ukraine will lose, Ukraine will fall in 3 days, and all these blah, blah, blah things. But we had 200,000 men which were come back to Ukraine in the few days at the beginning of the war, start fighting Russians. And I also, with my family, stayed in Kiev, and we decided to fight with my daughters and with my family. And we will do it, believe me, Mr. Markov. And you will be a war criminal, or you will be imprisoned soon, or you will be killed by Ukrainian special operations forces.
Let's not get dramatic, please. It's not nice for us to talk about killing co-panelists, etc. Let's keep the debate civil, please, as I've said earlier. But Dr. Markov, what would be an acceptable solution for Russia? Would Russia be willing to give certain parts of the land? There are, of course, a lot of territory, good part of Ukraine that has been occupied. What part of it would Russia be willing to give back to ensure that there is peace in the region? Because Ukraine is demanding security guarantees at this point of time. United States not ready to give that. And the point being made by EU and Ukraine is that how do we know that Russia won't launch an attack again, say in a few months or a few years from now?
First of all, I think from Ukrainian side, you invited not expert, but some kind of very aggressive, psychologically not a stable person. And it's first. Secondly, about peace deal. A Russian suggestion, it's very easy, that there should be not a break during the fighting, but it should be a real peace, real all security guarantee for all sides. For Ukraine, main security guarantee should be coming back to democracy. Ukraine, when it was democratic country before the military coup in 2014, from 1991 until 2014, Ukraine lived in full security nearby Russia. So Ukraine should be back to the democratic system. All political prisoners should be liberated in Ukraine. All prohibited political parties and media should be to act. And Russian language, of course, should get official status. Russian language is 70% of the Ukrainian population.
Quick response from Vibhuti Jha. I want to bring in Abhijit as well. Vibhuti Jha, Trump has a very difficult task at hand. Talking about peace in Ukraine and Russia is perhaps easier than, just making a statement. While there are, some baby steps that have been made, just look at the hardened positions of our panelists right here. And that just goes to show how easy or difficult it will be for these two leaders to ensure that there is a lasting peace in Europe. Vibhuti Jha.
Thank you. There is, in my study of history, I have not come across a single instance, and I'm open to correction, where there is a historical precedence of a country winning a war with other people's support. That's the tragedy of Ukraine. Millions of people and thousands of people are losing lives for the shenanigans played upon by NATO and European people who went back on their promise to Russia. That is a documented history. That is a documented fact. Trump is only trying to do, which I recall somebody I knew, Stephen Cohen, who had written a book on the Russia war, who was a New York Democrat, who we acknowledged in a very interesting, very nice award ceremony. And he said, I'm not voting for Trump. I have never voted for Trump. But on Russia, Trump is right. Because he said, and he has consulted with all the US presidents, and he said very clearly that both the countries have amazing ability to self-destruct each other or destroy each other in a nuclear warfare. You cannot be not talking to your friend. And that's the theme that Trump is taking forward.
Okay.
Is that you cannot not negotiate.
Well, will President Trump be successful in that endeavor? There are many, many challenges, as we saw in the Oval Office. There are attempts to, of course, broker some kind of understanding between Ukraine and US at this point of time. What really will happen? Will there be lasting peace in Europe? Those are several questions. And of course, the impact of all of these tariffs, globally speaking, when it comes to the economics of it, all of these are important questions indeed. Abhijit Iyer, Mithran, Major General Dhruv Katoch, David Sofair, Vibhuti Jha, Dean Baxendale, Dr. Sergei Markov, as well as Alexander Beletsky, Andrew K.P. Leung. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of The National Debate.